After deciding to marry my boyfriend, Ethan, and visiting his family's home to greet them on the day, I found myself being rejected by all his relatives who said, "Don't ever contact us again. We don't want to hear your voice." Perhaps because of their upbringing, being doted on for their good looks, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were harsh and jealous towards anyone who possessed something they did not. Unfortunately, I became the target of their envy. Both my father-in-law and brother-in-law, without any resistance, joined them in rejecting me. Several months ago, I was able to exact a grand revenge on these four. My name is Amy. I am 27 years old. Now I'm living peaceful and happy days surrounded by love with my husband, adorable child, and my parents. The origin of all this started 3 years ago when I was 24. It was triggered when my boyfriend at the time, Ethan, proposed to me. Ethan and I were colleagues at work, and we became close due to our shared hobby of movie watching, and we started dating after many movie outings together on our off days. Ethan had a calm temperament and was friendly to everyone at work, making him well liked by many. He disliked disputes and was the kind of kind-hearted person who could forgive others' mistakes. Since the time I entered the company, I was interested in Ethan, so when he asked me out, I was overjoyed, and I looked forward to going to work every day. Whenever I made a mistake at work and was feeling down, he would listen to me all night long, and I naturally started thinking, I want to be with this person forever. Ethan had dreams of starting his own business in the future, and I wanted to be by his side to support him all the way. When Ethan proposed to me, I was over the moon. Of course, there was no reason to reject him. I accepted his proposal immediately and decided to marry Ethan. On the weekend after Ethan proposed to me, we immediately went to my family's home, introduced Ethan to my parents, and announced our intentions to marry. Ethan was also kind to my parents, and he even had a great time drinking and getting along with my father. My parents seemed to take a liking to Ethan, and they joyfully agreed to our marriage and shared in our happiness. Seeing Ethan engaging happily in conversation with my parents, I sincerely felt fortunate to have met him. The weekend following the report to my parents, we were scheduled to visit Ethan's house. Having decided to go greet them, I realized that I hadn't heard much about Ethan's family from him. But at the time, I didn't think much of it, considering that Ethan was living alone and probably didn't keep in touch with his parents that much. The night before the day we were to visit Ethan's family, Ethan suddenly said during our phone conversation, "About tomorrow. My parents might be a bit odd, but don't worry about it too much." I was slightly concerned about what he meant by odd, but I figured I would find out the next day, and since we had to wake up early the next day, I decided not to worry about it too much and went to sleep. Around 10 a.m. the next day, I met up with Ethan at the station and we headed towards his house together. Since Ethan was living alone, this was my first time visiting his family home. Despite what I might say, I was nervous all morning, and when I was walking with Ethan, I hardly heard what he was saying because my heart was pounding so fast. What stood there was a grand mansion, like a castle. The garden was vast, and I was petrified when I thought, Ethan grew up here? My nerves eased a little when Ethan, with his usual gentle smile, said, "Are you nervous? It's okay, let's go." As soon as the front door opened, my mother-in-law was there to greet me. "Oh my, you've come all this way? You must be tired. Come on in quickly." She greeted me kindly. She was very slender, well made up, and her hair was beautifully arranged. Her expensive, wrinkle-free clothes were flawless. Once inside, my father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and their children were waiting. Everyone in the family other than my mother-in-law greeted me with smiles, which was a relief. I was warmly welcomed, took a seat on the sofa, had dinner while chatting with everyone, and announced our engagement. Ethan's family was very pleased, especially my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were excited, saying, "We're so happy to have such a cute girl join our family." I was moved by the warm welcome from these people. The pleasant conversation continued. Ethan's family were very talkative, and according to the stories that came up, my father-in-law ran a company that sold package tours, and my brother-in-law who lived with them was working there as an executive director, intending to take over the company in the future. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were housewives, supporting their husbands' lives, and they were living gracefully, attending dance classes and flower arrangement lessons during the day. My sister-in-law also took care of her appearance, and she exuded a confident atmosphere. My father-in-law was very kind, always smiling at me and making me feel at ease by bringing up various topics so that I wouldn't be nervous. I was sincerely glad he seemed like a good person. At that moment, a certain conversation with my father-in-law broke the harmonious atmosphere. "Amy, I heard that you work at the same company as Ethan. Are you a contract employee there?" No, I originally joined the company as a regular employee after graduating from university, just like Ethan. The company where Ethan and I work is a major corporation, known to the public as a top-tier company. It's a popular company among job seekers, and getting hired as a regular employee is challenging. But luckily, I was hired as a new graduate after college. Oh, is that so? Huh. In that case, where did you graduate from? I graduated from Harvard. That's amazing. You must be really talented. I'm so proud that someone as talented as you is marrying into our family. Amy's awesome, isn't she? She is very hardworking. She's competent at work and quick-witted. I'm so happy to be marrying her. My father-in-law and Ethan praised me so much it was embarrassing. In fact, I went to a top-tier university in the US, and I studied hard during my high school years, even at the expense of my sleep. My parents, who didn't have much money, worked hard to get me through college. I was determined to attend a good college, land a decent job, and someday definitely give back to my parents. I'd been striving towards that with all my heart. Caught up in a lively conversation with the two others, I noticed that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had gone quiet. I thought, oh no, and I desperately sought a change in the conversation. And noticing a beautiful arrangement of fresh flowers on the table before me, I asked, "Mother-in-law, that flower arrangement is lovely. Did you put it together?" To which she responded somewhat gruffly, "What? As if you, a professional working in a top-tier company, have any interest in housewives' time-killing activities." Confused, I wondered why her demeanor had changed when just a moment ago she was speaking with a smile. As if in agreement with my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law chimed in saying, "From your point of view, Amy, with your high education, you probably think all us uneducated housewives can talk about is flowers." I hadn't meant it that way at all. Not knowing what to say, I felt a lump in my throat, nearly bringing me to tears. Ethan quickly interjected, "Hey, both of you, stop that. Amy isn't the type to look down on people." Ethan's words were a comfort, but I couldn't bring myself to apologize or say anything, so I just kept my head down. Glancing around, I noticed my father-in-law, who had been drinking since noon, snoring and passed out on the sofa. My brother-in-law was clearly bored, yawning and scrolling through his phone, making the atmosphere in the room really tense. Then, at Ethan's suggestion, "Maybe it's about time we wrap this up," I was finally released from my uncomfortable atmosphere. On our way back to the station, Ethan apologized. "Sorry about today. My mom and sister have a high pride. They're particularly sensitive about their high school graduate." From what Ethan told me later, my mother-in-law had been working at a flower shop right after high school, where my father-in-law had spotted her and fallen in love at first sight. My mother-in-law was certainly a beautiful woman. She had many customers coming into the flower shop just to see her. Every day, my father-in-law would frequent the flower shop, and after a relentless pursuit, they started dating and eventually got married. Even now, it seems my father-in-law is always wrapped around my mother-in-law's little finger, always doing as she says. My sister-in-law was also a beautiful woman. She and my brother-in-law were high school classmates and had reconnected at reunion in their early 20s. Upon seeing how beautiful she had become, my brother-in-law fell head over heels, and after he persisted wooing, they ended up together. My brother-in-law too seems to do whatever his wife tells him to. Sure, I have a high level of education, but I couldn't understand why they felt insecure. They were both beautiful women who had kind husbands who would always protect them. I ended the day feeling unresolved and a little gloomy. A part of me started to question, is this marriage going to be all right? Leaving me with lingering discomfort. In any case, we received approval for our marriage from both families, so we started to plan our wedding. Even though the unease hadn't entirely disappeared, I felt that we would understand each other better if we talked more. "Don't worry, I'll always be on your side, Amy." I was able to stay positive. After nearly 6 months of lengthy preparation and with the final push at hand, it was finally the day before our wedding when Ethan's cell phone rang. It was from his mother. After having a brief conversation over the phone, Ethan let out a surprised shout. "What? Why? Huh? We can't just change it. Hey, hold on." It seemed like the call had been cut off. When I asked what happened, Ethan shocked me with what he said. "My parents, they said they're not coming to the wedding tomorrow." "What? What do you mean?" I was completely unable to digest the situation and anxiously asked Ethan. According to Ethan, it seemed that the in-laws had forgotten that they had booked a trip for the next day and couldn't attend the wedding. Unbelievable. The parents of my husband are skipping the wedding on the day before the ceremony? We stood there in a daze for a while. Not understanding why this happened, we tried calling not only the mother-in-law, but also the father-in-law and brother-in-law many times to get an explanation, but only the dial tone continued to ring and no one picked up the phone. Confused by the sudden situation, we quickly went to the in-laws' house, but the lights were off and there were no cars, indicating that nobody was home. I said to Ethan, "When I went to greet your family the other day, I wondered if I upset your mother and sister." The atmosphere was quite tense at the end, to which Ethan responded, "As I've said before, both my mother and sister have high pride. Smart women tend to be a bit hard-headed. Even if they hold a grudge for such a thing, I wouldn't know." When I asked, "But why would your father also skip the wedding?" Ethan replied, "My dad and brother-in-law, they're both very submissive to their wives. They probably sided with them to not upset my mother and sister." Ethan said this with a distressed look. I was at a loss for words. In the end, we were unable to contact Ethan's family even on the day of the wedding, so we had no choice but to go ahead with the wedding without Ethan's family present. Why did this happen? Did I do something wrong? And was it really true that they forgot they were going on a hot springs trip? Even if it were true, I couldn't comprehend why Ethan's family would choose a trip over attending their own son's wedding. My parents, who had arrived at the wedding venue, were very surprised when they heard that Ethan's family would not be attending. Ethan said to my parents, "I'm very sorry for the trouble my parents have caused." My parents responded, "It's not your fault, Ethan. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the wedding." But their expressions were a bit complicated. I felt terrible for making my parents have such expressions at the wedding. During the reception, we could hear whispers among Ethan's friends and mine asking, "Why aren't Ethan's parents here?" And the boss from work, who kindly agreed to give a toast, also asked, "What happened to your parents?" leaving us wondering how to answer. He couldn't possibly say, "My parents are at a trip instead of attending their son's wedding." When we were asked about Ethan's parents that day, we brushed it off saying they were feeling unwell. What was supposed to be a joyous day turned out to be one mentally exhausting day. Several days after the wedding ceremony, Ethan and I went to his parents' house to report that the ceremony had ended. "Oh, Amy, it's been a while. How was the wedding? Did you have fun?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't make it because of my trip that day. I meant to buy you a souvenir, but I got so busy and forgot." She said this with no signs of remorse. "No, it's okay. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip." Inside, I felt sadness, wondering why I had to suffer such treatment, but to avoid worsening our relationship with Ethan's family, I responded with a forced smile. Ethan said, "It's unacceptable to cancel the day before. A wedding where all the relatives are absent? Is that even normal? If you didn't want to attend, we shouldn't have invited you in the first place." Then the sister-in-law said, "I would have attended if Amy wasn't the bride." What? What does that mean? I was so confused that my head started spinning. Then, as if to counterattack, the mother-in-law said, "Don't just blame us. I wanted to see my cute son's once-in-a-lifetime moment, but Amy ruined it. I'm a victim too. I'd like an apology." Ethan spoke up on behalf of me, who was too shocked to respond. "What do you mean Amy caused it? Amy didn't do anything." Then the father-in-law, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Enough is enough. How dare you come in here in the middle of our day off and complain? Is that all you came here for? Get out." He yelled at us with incredible ferocity, and we were forcibly kicked out. And as I was putting on my shoes at the entrance, I felt a prick on the bottom of my foot. Ouch! In a panic, I lifted my foot and saw a caterpillar crawling inside my shoe. Ew! I, with one shoe on, ran outside and let the caterpillar go. The mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who had been watching, said, "Are you okay?" while snickering maliciously. I, who wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, said, "Sorry for the trouble," and was about to leave the house quickly when I was stopped by my mother-in-law. "Amy, please don't get involved with us except for weddings and funerals." Huh? Before I could ask why, she abruptly closed the door, ending the conversation. I really don't understand what I've done. I just wanted to get along with Ethan's family. On the way home, Ethan kept apologizing to me. He said, "You don't have to force yourself to interact with my family anymore. I'm really sorry." The mother-in-law and sister-in-law said they would have attended the wedding if I hadn't been the bride. Feeling as if I was the one who had done something wrong without even knowing why, I started to feel sorry for Ethan. The very next day, I woke up to intense itching all over my body. The itch was so unbearable that I jumped out of bed and rushed to the mirror, only to find my entire body had swollen up fiery red. I was supposed to work that day, but quickly got a sick day and went to the dermatologist. Apparently, the swelling on my entire body was due to the caterpillar stings. The caterpillar from yesterday, huh? The itching was incredibly intense, and for about 2 weeks since that day, I was unable to sleep properly due to the severe itching. Come to think of it, I noticed my brother-in-law touching my shoes at the front door when I went to Ethan's house. The old me would have thought a caterpillar had just accidentally crawled in, but at that time, I felt nothing but distrust towards my in-laws. A month after that, Ethan was hospitalized due to ill health. He had been complaining of frequent stomach pains for a week before being hospitalized, so I, who was worried, forcefully made him take a day off from work and took him to the hospital, where he was told that he probably had a gastric ulcer and needed to be hospitalized for further tests. I was told not to contact them unless it was for a wedding or a funeral, so I hesitated, but I thought that it was not something to keep secret from Ethan's parents, so I plucked up the courage and called my in-laws. Hello? My mother-in-law picked up the phone. While the phone was ringing, I couldn't stop my hand from shaking, and I felt nauseous the moment I heard my mother-in-law's voice. That's how much I had come to dislike my mother-in-law. Hello, it's Amy. I'm sorry I haven't been in touch. What is it this time? Well, Ethan has been hospitalized due to ill health. They think it might be a gastric ulcer, but he's being admitted for tests just in case, so I thought I should let you know. Ah, a gastric ulcer, huh? Isn't it because you're overworking him? Please don't call me for such trivial matters. I'm busy. Trivial matter? Don't you care about Ethan? I don't want to hear your voice. I'll tell you clearly because you seem dull. I don't want to have anything to do with you from now on, so please don't contact me again. I'm worried about Ethan. That's why I'll call him directly. Then my brother-in-law suddenly came on the phone. Look, you're too persistent. Read the room a little. I don't know if Ethan's been hospitalized or what, but it's annoying to have you contact us every time. He hung up the phone unilaterally. The moment I heard the sound of the phone hanging up, I felt like something inside me had snapped. The in-laws who mercilessly threw harsh words at me, the mother-in-law who said don't contact us, even though her own son was hospitalized, and the entire family of in-laws who rejected me unilaterally, I couldn't forgive them. You don't want me to contact you again because it's a bother? I don't want to have anything to do with that strange family. I will never contact them again, no matter what happens. After that, there were no significant abnormalities in Ethan's test results, and it turned out to be a mild gastric ulcer, so he took medication for a while and his health improved significantly. Of course, I explained the whole situation to Ethan. Ethan, with a look of resolve on his face, told me, "Let's stop getting involved with my family. The only person that matters to me now is Amy. If they can't accept Amy, then even if we're connected by blood, they're not family to me." A year after that happened, Ethan finally left his job and realized his long-standing dream of starting a software sales business. He had been dreaming of starting his own business since before we got married. Of course, he leveraged his previous job experience to accomplish this. Ethan worked harder than anyone else at his job to achieve this. Although we're still at the starting point, I was happy to see even a bit of Ethan's dream becoming a reality. And our happiness continued. A year after he started his business, a healthy baby boy was born to us. My parents were overjoyed at the birth of their grandchild. Despite the nearly 2-hour journey from my house to theirs, they visited us frequently, making each day extremely blissful. Naturally, we did not report the birth of our child to Ethan's parents. Well, even if we had, they probably wouldn't have cared anyway, so it doesn't really matter. We didn't hear a thing from Ethan's parents after the phone call. Feeling relieved that we didn't have to deal with that peculiar family anymore was somewhat comforting. Then, several months later, something happened. The new coronavirus began to spread globally, and our country also declared a state of emergency and called for people to refrain from going out. Watching the news, all we saw were discussions about coronavirus. As the call for non-essential outings to be refrained grew louder, it was clear that the restaurant and tourism industries were severely affected. My heart ached for them. Suddenly, I wondered how the package tour company run by Ethan's father was doing, but it was none of my concern. No, I might have even cracked a smile imagining the state of his father's business. Despite the circumstances, Ethan's business was doing very well. While there was some instability in our income when we first started the business, recently our income has been higher than when Ethan was an employee and everything was going well. Around this time, Ethan started to receive a lot of calls from his parents' home. However, Ethan seemed to be avoiding getting involved with them, and he didn't pick up the phone even when he noticed the calls. There were also some voicemails left, but because he decided not to be involved with his family anymore, he ignored them without even listening to them. I often told Ethan, "You don't have to worry about me. It's okay to get in touch with them. From my perspective, I despise his family. But for Ethan, they're his family who raised him, and I felt guilty making him cut ties with his parents because of me. However, Ethan told me, as I've said before, Amy is the most important person to me, not my parents. If they can't accept Amy, even if they are my parents, I can't value them. I felt sorry, but also happy for Ethan's unwavering kindness. Ethan was still receiving calls from his father and mother every day, all of which he ignored. Then one day, a letter arrived from Ethan's family home. The letter simply stated, "Our business is on the verge of bankruptcy and we have some financial matters we'd like to discuss. We need to talk as soon as possible." Pretty audacious for someone who had cut ties with us. Their nerve was just as strong as ever, and they demanded urgent contact. Of course we didn't get in touch. Let him suffer. That's what he deserves. Next thing I knew, my cell phone was ringing. I didn't notice the call as I was at work, but a voicemail was kindly left for me. It seemed like Ethan had not been answering his phone, so the caller had reluctantly reached out to me instead. It's quite audacious, especially when I had told them not to contact me. Reluctantly, I decided to listen to the message that was left on my voicemail. All I got was a message saying, "Is this Amy's number? If Ethan continues to ignore me, I'll come knocking. Let him know." That's all it said. 2 days after the voicemail was left, Ethan had the day off because it was Saturday. We were enjoying a leisure family day at home. We had just finished lunch and were discussing what to do for the rest of the day when the doorbell rang. When I checked the monitor, there stood my 4 in-laws. Seeing my shocked face, Ethan came over to check the monitor as well. Ethan let out a heavy sigh and said to me, "You don't have to answer. They'll give up and leave if we don't open the door." However, I said, "It's fine. They've come all this way, so we should let them in. It's kind of pitiful." Ethan thought for a moment, then said, "Okay," and unlocked the door. Pitiful? No way would I ever feel that way about such diabolical in-laws. I purposely didn't tell Ethan about the voicemail. All of this was to lure them into our home. Of course, my shock at seeing them through the monitor was just an act. I knew they would show up sooner or later. There was a reason why I let Ethan's parents into our house. The real retaliation is yet to come. It's time for a full-scale confrontation. The entire in-law family had come to our front door. As soon as the door was opened and the 4 of them marched in without a hint of restraint, spoke in a frustrated tone, "How long does it take to just open the door?" Such a bunch of ill-mannered people, it's unbelievable. As soon as they entered the house, Ethan's mother saw our son happily playing with his toys on the floor and said, "Whose child is this?" I responded, "He's our son." "Ah, I remember now. You said not to contact you anymore, so I didn't report it. But I don't think you're interested in anyway, so whether or not I report it makes no difference." Upon hearing this, Ethan's mother stared at me with a look of contempt and muttered under her breath, "You are so cheeky." I was starting to enjoy the situation and asked Ethan's father, "So what brings you here today? If you wanted to visit, you should have let us know in advance." Ethan's father responded, "Didn't you read the letter?" "Do you mean the one that arrived 2 days ago?" I said, to which Ethan's father angrily said, "If you read it, you should have contacted us. It said we needed to hear from you urgently." Quick to respond, I said, "Oh, you wanted me to contact you? But you said you didn't want to have anything to do with us anymore, so I didn't think it was necessary." Looking at the stern faces of the 4, it was hard for me to suppress my laughter. Ethan, my husband, remained silent as if letting me say everything I wanted. True to form, he knew how to read the room. It's hard to believe he was born to parents who lacked such common sense. Then my father-in-law abruptly changed his attitude and began pleading. "I beg you, I apologize for the past. Due to this COVID situation, everyone's been canceling their travel reservations one after another. We're not getting any new bookings either, and who knows how long this situation will continue. If things go on this long, my business will be ruined, so can't you help me out with some money?" I responded, "I see, that's tough, but no. I'm afraid I have to decline. I don't want to conveniently assist someone who said they wanted nothing to do with me anymore. However, if you're really desperate, if you show me sincerity, I might reconsider." My father-in-law shouted, "What the hell?" and started to intimidate me with a furious face. But I wasn't scared anymore. I decided to handle things my way. "I didn't say you had to. Feel free to leave if you want to." My father-in-law looked vexed, slowly started begging. "I'm sorry, please help me out," he pleaded. Seeing that, I didn't respond. He told the other 3 to also apologize to me, and finally, all 4 of them started begging. When I responded, "No thank you," with a smile, my father-in-law suddenly got angry and banged his hand on the table. He then shouted, "You! When I'm humbling myself, you're getting high and mighty," and grabbed my collar. Surprised by his sudden aggression, I was about to tell him to stop when Ethan said, "Hey, Dad, don't lay a hand on Amy." My father-in-law asked, "You're going to take your wife's side when your parents are begging like this?" Ethan replied, "The most important person to me right now is Amy. I can't care about someone who treats Amy poorly, even if they're my parents. And I don't need any superficial apologies just for money. If you can't apologize to Amy from the bottom of your heart, just leave." At this, my father-in-law, seemingly enraged, punched Ethan square in the face. "Is that how you talk to your parents?" Blood was coming out of Ethan's mouth from the punch. I tried to say something to my father-in-law, but he was still so angry. He started to kick Ethan, who was on the ground. I yelled, "What are you doing to Ethan?" and tried to hold my father-in-law from behind, but he shrugged me off and I was thrown back, hitting my head on the corner of the table. I touched the back of my head where I hit it. My hand came back covered in blood. The other 3 people, excluding my father-in-law, looked shocked and frozen in place. As my father-in-law started ransacking the room shouting, "Where's the money?" I quickly opened the balcony window and yelled to the people passing by, "Help! I'm being murdered!" 5 minutes later, the police arrived. When the police arrived, my father-in-law quickly calmed down and began to blather, "Sorry for the commotion. I just got carried away with the excitement of seeing my grandson. My daughter-in-law seems drunk or something. She's been shouting strange things," he started with a flippant smile. I explained to the officer, "Please take this man away. He hit both my husband and me. He's also been ransacking our house, demanding cash." Suddenly, father-in-law shouted, "I didn't do anything!" And with a curse, he punched a hole in the wall. He was arrested on the spot. The other 3 of them were also taken to the station for questioning. Afterwards, it seems that father-in-law was held in jail for a while. Ethan, my husband, had been punched in the cheek, but fortunately it was just a light cut and bruise that healed quickly. On the other hand, the wound on the back of my head turned out to be bigger than I thought, and I ended up getting 10 stitches. I feel guilty for causing Ethan to get hurt as a result of luring my in-laws to our house for my revenge, but I'm glad that they have stopped asking for money, seemingly regretting their actions. From what I heard later, as I expected when they first met me, father-in-law praised me and both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law became jealous. The 2 of them apparently instructed father-in-law and my brother-in-law to act coldly towards me. Of course, neither father-in-law nor my brother-in-law could stand up to them and were merely doing as told. The caterpillar that ended up in my shoe was likely the work of my brother-in-law, egged on by my sister-in-law. Jealousy is indeed frightening. It's unbelievable how much it can change someone's life. You never know what might happen. Afterwards, as expected, my in-laws had no way of getting their hands on money. Their business went bankrupt. And their house was seized. Now it seems they live in a cheap apartment. Both my father-in-law and my mother-in-law are nearing 70. It's difficult for them to find work again. My brother-in-law had been working at father-in-law's company, but taking advantage of being the boss's son, he didn't work seriously and seemed to spend all day at the casino. Approaching 50 with no useful skills, it's hard for my brother-in-law to find a job, and it seems he's now making a living with a part-time job at a convenience store. My sister-in-law had been a stay-at-home wife with no significant career, and she seemed to be job hunting at employment agencies and the like. However, due to her selfish personality, she kept complaining about this and that and couldn't hold a part-time job down for long. Now, she seems to be cooped up at home. A little after that incident, my father retired and we decided to live together with my parents. The person who proposed living together was none other than Ethan. It was because I am an only child and he was concerned about my parents' life in their old age. I've returned to work now, and my parents take care of our son during the day, so I feel secure balancing childcare and work. Ethan, my beloved husband, and my kind parents. And of course, my son, who is my treasure. Life with them is the happiest. I resolve never to forget to be grateful for this happiness. I'm Alvina, a 34-year-old stay-at-home mom. My family of 4 includes my husband Morris, our 2 daughters who are in elementary school, and we also live together with my in-laws on the same property, making us a household of 6. Before marriage, I worked a job with night shifts, but Morris suggested, "I'd rather you quit if it means we don't cross paths as much," so I chose to leave my job. Since then, I devoted my time to raising our children when they were young and worked part-time when things got a bit more manageable. I wasn't very keen on the idea of living with my in-laws. At the point of contemplating living together, I was still uncertain about what kind of people they were, regardless of how wonderful they might be. I believed that a daughter-in-law living with her in-laws could lead to stress. So I felt relieved when Morris assured me before our marriage that we wouldn't have to live with his parents. However, right after we got married, Morris brought up the subject of living with his parents, saying, "I'm worried about my parents. What about living on the same property? It's not like we will be living in the same house, right?" I was taken aback and protested, but Morris countered, "Do you dislike my parents that much? We will live on the same property but separately. I just want to be near in case something happens. If our situations were reversed, wouldn't you want to live with your parents?" I found myself unable to refute him. My parents were still fit and healthy, living with my brother and his wife, so we were not going to live with them. I think that's why Morris could say things like, "If the roles were reversed, I would live with them." While I was still undecided and had not given my approval, Morris told me after a while, "My parents have already started building a house on our property. We can't refuse now." And so, we were forced into living together. Although I was unhappy, I managed to negotiate one condition. We will not interfere with each other's lives. And so, our shared property living arrangement began. My in-laws adhered to our agreement of non-interference. We led separate lives in our respective homes, and I joined them for meals once or twice a week. The house they built on our property was beautiful, and I even began to think that it might be a lucky break for us since we would inherit it eventually. However, that was a big mistake. My mother-in-law slowly started breaking our initial agreement. At first, she would visit our house once or twice a week and ask for help with tasks that I felt were reasonable, such as, "My back hurts a little, can you carry this?" Or, "I'm not feeling well today, can you prepare dinner?" However, over time, she started making demands like, "Isn't breakfast ready yet?" And, "Why hasn't our part of the house been cleaned?" As if it was a given that I would be doing all the housework. As a result, I ended up cooking all 3 meals and cleaning both houses. Morris didn't say anything about this. Only my father-in-law would say, "Sorry for always asking you to do this." Sometimes he would kindly offer me some snacks and say, "I know it's not much, but please have this." Not only did my mother-in-law make me do the housework, but she also started interfering with how we educated our children. She started saying things like, "They should take these lessons," or, "It's strange that your 2 girls don't help with housework. What did you give birth to 2 girls for?" Yet every time mother-in-law lashed out at me, father-in-law would come to my defense. "You remember we had agreed to manage our respective homes, right?" Father-in-law would chide mother-in-law, who would say, "Oh right, I forgot. I guess I'm feeling weak and unwell, so I might have leaned on you a bit too much. I'm sorry." And she would apologize, at least on the surface. But a few hours later, when father-in-law wasn't looking, the harassment would start again. Even when I tried to tell Morris that this wasn't what we had agreed on, he would just say, "Even if you made an agreement at first, we're family, aren't we? We should be flexible when times get tough. It's your fault for not handling it well." I spent my days filled with frustration, and then, suddenly, mother-in-law collapsed at home. We quickly called an ambulance, but mother-in-law passed away from a sudden seizure. I couldn't tell father-in-law or Morris, but part of me was relieved that the harassment would finally end. Despite our agreement to not interfere in each other's lives, father-in-law had always been kind to me, and I felt differently towards him. I did my best to take care of him and his needs. Father-in-law often thanked me, saying, "I'm sorry for breaking our agreement not to interfere. I just can't handle housework on my own. Thank you so much." Our daughters were very fond of their gentle grandfather, and we spent many peaceful days together. But sadly, this peace didn't last long. Just a few months after mother-in-law passed away, father-in-law suddenly collapsed too. Father-in-law survived, but he was bedridden and needed constant care. During a discussion about father-in-law's care, he mentioned wanting to go to a nursing home to avoid being a burden, but Morris stepped in. "Don't say things like that, Dad. Family should care for each other. Nursing homes are for when family absolutely can't. Alvina said she's okay with taking care of you," he said, completely taking me by surprise. I did love father-in-law. I wanted to do whatever I could to help him. Even if he went to a nursing home, I was planning to visit him frequently, but caring for him full-time at home was a different matter entirely. It was clear that Morris wouldn't help. As a stay-at-home mom with young kids to look after, taking care of father-in-law would be a significant challenge. But I couldn't express my reluctance in front of father-in-law, who was different from mother-in-law. I had no choice but to agree to his care. As expected, the caregiving was quite difficult. I needed to assist him with meals, bathroom visits, and bathing. Father-in-law was a robust, elderly man, and as a member of the opposite sex, we both felt uncomfortable at times. Every day, I'd assist with the kids' school preparations and breakfast, do housework during the day, care for the kids when they got home, and prepare dinner, all on top of caring for father-in-law. Every night before going to sleep, I'd think, "I somehow made it through the day." Then I would just collapse into bed. Morris, instead of helping with father-in-law's care, started spending even less time at home, citing work as an excuse. He claimed to have overnight work and only came home about 2 to 3 times a week. Furthermore, because I never knew when he'd come back home, I often struggled to prepare dinner in time. On days when my body ached from the sheer exhaustion, I prepare something simple. But even then, Morris would rage, "I'm working my tail off there, and this is the thanks I get?" When I asked him for a little help around the house or with caring for his father, he retorted, "You're a full-time homemaker, aren't you? Caring for my father is your job." I felt miserable every day. This distressing situation dragged on for 3 years. My 2 daughters grew older and began to help with housework and caring for their grandfather, which helped lighten the burden. Chantel pitched in every day, helping with cooking and cleaning. Janie tenderly wiped her grandfather's back each day, asking, "Does that feel good, Grandpa?" I was truly grateful to have such kind daughters. One day, Morris left his mobile phone at home when he went to work. Despite knowing better, I couldn't resist the temptation to take a look inside his phone. The password was his birthday, so I could unlock it instantly. What I found inside was a succession of shocking revelations. Unbelievably, Morris had been having an affair since around the time I started caring for his father, and they even had a child together. From their text messages, it was clear that Morris was also supporting his mistress financially. Although he'd given me money for living expenses and said, "I'll save the rest for our children's future," he hadn't saved a dime. The messages got worse. "My kid's already in elementary school, so he's not cute anymore." And "Caring for the old man is a pain, but thank God for my idle wife. It's a waste of money to put him in a care facility, but having my wife do it is free. Gotta make use of free labor, right? LOL. He was ridiculing me and our children. Under normal circumstances, I should have kept my cool and stayed silent until I had definitive evidence, but I was so furious, I couldn't remain calm. As soon as Morris got out of the bath, I shoved his mobile phone in his face and demanded, "What is this about?" At first, Morris seemed a little taken aback, but he quickly regained his composure. "You've lost your femininity since you had our kids," he said, scorn filling his words. "You've stopped wearing makeup, and your outfits are all about comfort. Since you started breastfeeding our second child and falling asleep with your mouth open, I felt completely turned off. And when you began caring for my dad, you lost even more of your femininity. You're not even a middle-aged woman anymore, more like a middle-aged man." His cruel words tore at my heart. But he didn't stop there. "You know, my girlfriend always wears makeup and takes care of her appearance, even after having a child," he continued, coldly asserting. "I have no plans to divorce you for appearance's sake, but my love is for her and our child. I'm not sure who'll go first, but once my dad is gone and our kids are adults, I plan to kick you out and live in the house with her." And so he continued to spew words indicating he considered me nothing more than trash, even though he appeared to have some concern for the children. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I too want to dress up and put on proper makeup, but you didn't help with childcare or housework at all. Juggling unfamiliar childcare and trying to do housework perfectly, I had to do it frantically, even if it meant messing up my hair. If you wanted me to look beautiful, why didn't you help with housework, childcare, or even the elder care? And even without a payback, shouldn't a husband and a father naturally help out? I pleaded through my tears, but my words didn't resonate with Morris. "That's not true. Look at other women. They stay beautiful while raising their kids. As I've told you many times, it's just that you're not efficient. You, a stay-at-home mom, have no right to argue with me, the one who's putting food on the table," he coldly retorted. "If you have a complaint, you're free to divorce, you know? For a woman in her mid-30s like you, employment opportunities are limited, right? You think you can raise our 2 kids just because you'll get a bit of alimony and compensation from me?" he sneered. I felt struck in the worst possible way, and I couldn't say anything in return. Thinking about the children, I felt I couldn't divorce. Seeing this, Morris said, "You can't, can you? If you care about the kids, you'll take care of my father until the end. After that, you'll work as my housekeeper. But don't worry, when the kids grow up, they'll help you out. So you better treat them well." He then went into his room with a satisfied smirk. For a while, I was dumbfounded and remained in place. Somehow I managed to regain my sanity and went to attend to my father-in-law. I intended to act as usual, but it must have been clear something was wrong. My father-in-law asked, "Is something wrong?" I tried to brush it off, saying, "Nothing at all." I couldn't hold back my tears, and I ended up telling him everything. After hearing me out, he said, "Alvina, I have something to give you. Can you come back in a few hours?" I did as he asked, and when I went to him after a few hours, he handed me a piece of paper with someone's contact details and said, "Contact this person." He then added, "They know everything. I should be the one taking action, but with this body of mine." He smiled brightly. A few days later, Morris told me, "As I told you before, I will be on a business trip for a week from now. Well, I guess it's better for you too if we call it a business trip, right? I will enjoy the sightseeing, so I decided to take this opportunity to take action." And a week later, "Hey, what the hell is going on? I come home and everything is gone?" Morris was raging and half panicking when he called me. I replied, "Oh, my, how was your week-long affair trip? Did you enjoy it?" Morris shouted, "Hey, stop messing around. I'm asking what the hell is going on." I decided to explain to Morris. The contact that my father-in-law gave me was for a Mr. Quarry, an old friend of his and a well-known, large-scale landowner in the region. Apparently, Mr. Quarry had always coveted the land where my in-laws' house stood and had been trying to negotiate for it. However, my father-in-law would always refuse, saying, "I plan to leave it to my son." But after observing the behavior of his son Morris and hearing my story, he seemed to have decided that his son was a lost cause. We had known in advance that Morris was planning to take a week-long affair trip because he was openly defiant and didn't try to hide it at all. Before that week, I had a talk with Mr. Quarry and we arranged to sell the house and land. It was a piece of land that Mr. Quarry had wanted for quite some time, so he was willing to buy it at a price considerably higher than the market rate. And during that week, the house was demolished. My father-in-law had requested Mr. Quarry, "This might be a bit selfish, but given the circumstances, could you do the demolition during this period if you're planning to anyway?" So when Morris came back, all he found was an empty lot. And we're going to have a new house built with my money my father-in-law got from selling the old house and land. Upon hearing this, Morris tried to persuade me to return to him, saying, "But you're jobless, aren't you? Even if Dad builds a house, you can't expect to be supported for the rest of your life. What are you going to do without my income? It's going to be tough, right?" I replied, "Well, don't worry about that. I did have some concerns about that part, but my father-in-law and Mr. Quarry have done quite a bit. I got a job offer from a company run by an acquaintance who happens to be looking for employees." And then I asked him, "Morris, shouldn't you be worrying about yourself instead?" When Morris suspiciously asked, "What do you mean?" I told him, "The company where you are working now, you got it because the president is a friend of your father's. But now that he's deciding to cut ties with you, he's spoken to the president. Feel free to fire him if this work is poor and he's committing adultery." The president responded, "It was hard to say, but he's been acting like he can't be fired and causing trouble. Let's see what happens from tomorrow." All I heard from the other end of the line was a surprised, "What?" Then silence. He tried to excuse himself, saying, "Well, I mean, I might have said some things out of anger before, like I was going to leave you in the future, but come on, that can't be true. Don't take it seriously. We're family. We should stick together, right? Can't you mediate between me and Dad?" So I told him, my family now is my daughters and my father-in-law. Goodbye, and hung up the phone. There were numerous calls from Morris after that, but I ignored them all. Later on, my divorce from Morris was finalized. I claimed compensation from Morris and his mistress. As Morris hadn't tried to hide his affair at all, I had gathered plenty of evidence. All of this information I heard from various people, such as the president of Morris's company, who was a friend of my father-in-law. Although it seems like extramarital affair wouldn't have led to this firing, astonishingly, Morris was embezzling company funds to support his double life. Morris was not only fired from his job, but he's also being sued for damages. He lost his home and job and tried to move in with his mistress, only to be dumped when she realized he had no money. On top of all of this, he was ordered to pay child support. Now Morris is spending his days job hunting while working multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts and child support. As for me, I plan to live with my daughters and my father-in-law in a fully leased house until I move into the house my father-in-law is building for us. When father-in-law offered to build the house, he said, "I'm moving into a care facility. I want you and your daughters to live happily here, Alvina." I countered, "What are you talking about, Dad? We're family. Besides, it would make the girls sad. Let's live together." Hearing this, my daughters also took father-in-law's hand and said, "We want to live with Grandpa." With tears in his eyes, father-in-law thanked us. While the girls do help out, caring for him while working is indeed tough, so we are currently enjoying our life together as a family of 4 with the help of home assistants and day services. We can't wait to move into our new home as a family of 4.